It is a delight to hear you talking to one another and knowing that that means that Jesus has shown up in your week. Now, it is Mother's Day, and you might notice we're talking about Cain and Abel. And you might be going, huh? So I actually took the time, I won't show you all the pictures I found, to Google Mother's Day, and then I put the name of the different countries of people in our churches or where they are originally from. To a country. They were all very sentimental. Pretty flowers, parents, daughters, and mothers in matching clothes. It's very sweet. So I suggest you do it. Just go global, get your globe, and go around the world and put in Mother's Day and put it a different place. Our message today is not that message. It is not sentimental Mother's Day. And if you want that, you can look at Genesis 4, the beginning of the chapter, and Genesis 4, the end of the chapter. There, Adam and Eve made love and had babies, and that is happy. But we're going to look at what happens after you have children. And it's not all easy. I love my children, and since you all know my children, or at least most of them, this is just being real. That parenting is hard. More than once, some child in my family would be sassy, and I'd be like, it's not in my parenting book, so we're going with my gut, and this is what's happening. Like, there's no parenting book that tells you everything that can arise. Also, I'm aware that many humans have complicated relationships with their own mothers. Mothers pass away. Mothers are not all well. Mothers are not all walking with Jesus. Children are not all well. Children are not all easy. We lose our mothers. So, I humbly bring to you a Mother's Day message about parenting children, or really not parenting children, what happens when real human life comes into your family. So, as I said, we're in Genesis 4. Adam and Eve had babies. It's a lovely thing. The first one, it's a big celebration. It's a boy. His name is all in the grandeur in the celebration. The second one is like literally the translation of Abel's name is vapor, nothingness. How disappointing that at your birth, your mama couldn't come up with more to speak over you. But that's what happened. Names matter. And then we fast forward, and they're grown up. And we know that Adam and Eve's relationship with God was their children were being invited into it because we meet the brothers at worship. In halfway through verse 2. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Adam and Eve celebrated when Cain came. And imagine the grief when he left. I also, because as a parent, there can be seasons of real grief, want to point out they were adults still worshiping God when this happened. There are no guarantees for parents. There's a lot of wisdom in what we can give our children, but children grow up and make choices and make ways. We're literally going to go bottom up. So, including, God says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Cain had been included in family worship. We can assume that because he's still doing family worship. He's still aware of Abel's practice and relationship with God. It's not even differentiated. And Cain allows his anger to move him through a series of exclusions. Now, here's just something I've learned along the way, is that one of the biggest anxiety responses, if I feel uncomfortable around you, guess what? Cut you off. There's even like little memes now on social media. That's not what God does. But humans, when I get uncomfortable, we tend to cut other humans off instead of learning and sitting with our anxiety. So Cain was angry, and then he was downcast, and he needed to exclude his brother. And the exclusion comes here. It feels extreme. He kills his brother. That's the ultimate in cutoff. But lest you think, well, Ellen, I'm not going to kill anybody. First of all, I'll have trouble believing that only because of my own past. And I have the cleanest, best classmate who was a Christian, axe murdered his father and tried his mother. So I actually know that good people can do horrible things. But more likely than that you're going to do that is you're going to Matthew 5 it. And if you remember from the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, if you are at the altar and you remember that someone, your brother or sister, is angry with you, stop that offering and go make peace. And that is what I would say we are most likely with. Cain moved fast in the exclusion of his brother, and Cain became the one excluded. That's what unresolved anger and actually downcastness does to us. You may not be as violent as he, but ask yourself, are there relationships in my family of birth, my family of choice, my family of creation, my extended family, where there's somebody cut off? And then begin to think about your Christian family and where has that possibly entered. So God asked him this question when the emotions showed up. And Cain, part of what was happening is that Abel and his interaction with God showed a picture to Cain of himself that didn't match what Cain thought he was. Cain thought, I'm a good guy. I'm the favorite older son. I am a good farmer. Everything was good. And when God called out something that wasn't right, when the mirror was held up, Cain chose to preserve his self-identity rather than responding to how God showed up. God sees him as angry, as downcast, and with an offering that wasn't quite there. So when God, the Spirit of Jesus, holds up a mirror, are you responsive? Or are you quickly moving into self-justifying? What God warns him is the ruling. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This ruling is another theme, not just in this chapter, but in Genesis. Do you remember humans were called to rule over creation? And then in the curse, ruling is referenced. And here, Cain had a choice. He was being preyed upon. And he instead became the predator. He did not rule on what was trying to attack him, but instead he began to prey upon his brother. He is praying. Do you see? He is in conversation with God while this happens. Now, often we think of sin as a bad choice. It is. But here, what does the Lord say? He says, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Read Ephesians 6 later. Sin is evil. There's a dynamic power. There are powers and principalities. And God is saying that Cain had what he needed to do what is right. In one of Paul's letters in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, it tells us that when we are tempted, there is a way made to go out. Now, I think we think that's for the big, famous sins, the sins that movies are made of. I'm telling you, this is also here for Adam and Eve, first family, just left the garden, brothers disagreeing. Cain could have made other choices. He was... God's inviting him into a different way of being, into a new reality, into a new way of being family, into a new family position. Have you noticed in family that everybody has like a role? I'm the oldest sister. It means I'm really bossy. It means I get a lot of stuff done. It also means when my father's in the hospital, y'all have now seen this, I'm not making this stuff up, or my father somebody needs to call 911, I get the phone call 3,000 kilometers away to say, yeah, y'all need to call 911. It's sort of weird. Cain couldn't learn a new way and a new role. God invited him to. And God invites us. If we actually want to honor our parents, one of the things is becoming more and more who you were created to be. Now, in the midst of all of this, Cain probably would have been fine with just Abel and diminishing him. But what Cain could not stomach was the truth that God brought into the conflict with his brother. And so, am I my brother's keeper? If you notice, verses 6 is God confronting him. Verses 6, 7. Verse 8, this is where Cain acts horrifically. And then we get to what's basically a legal case from God. God investigates in verse 9 and 10. And then God sentences in verse 11 and 12. In verse 13, Cain appeals. Now, what I want you to know, in case you are the one who right now is angry or you are downcast with somebody that's in your family or who you love, maybe you're angry and downcast with God. And you're here this morning because your mama's going to ask, did you go to church today? And you want to Mother's Day happy her from far away. Sometimes that happens. I want you to see that God's presence never left Cain. God's care never left Cain. Cain did something horrible, and God still was loving him and caring and trying to make ways for him in righteousness. Cain had to learn the same thing he hadn't learned before he killed his brother. Do you realize that? When we have sin crouching at our door and we choose to go with it, it doesn't mean we'll never, ever have to still learn what we could have avoided. And he's having to learn now, what does it mean to be a brother? I want you to think about older brothers in the Bible. Seems to me it's a bad role to have. Cain's a doozy. Think about with Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael gets banished. Okay? Then we get to Esau and Jacob, but we always say Jacob and Esau because Jacob preempted him. Then we get Joseph's older brothers that sell him off into slavery because one was trying to save him from the others killing him. It's a mess. And we could keep going all the way to the prodigal son, where there is another older brother who is out in the field. And this older brother is also mad about his little brother coming home and being reconciled to the father. We understand sibling conflict. Did anybody ever fight with your brothers and sisters? Ooh. Craig was scared the first time he was at my house for a dinner when it wasn't a fight because we were so blunt with each other. One of my brothers put his hand, my brother's kind of big men, and he is like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And Craig's family's not quite so blunt and confrontive. And he was like, oh my gosh, what's about to happen here at this dinner table? Siblings get on each other's nerves. Siblings also walk and support and help. Cain, Abel. Hebrews 11:4 honors Abel's faith and said that Abel's life is still speaking. If we looked at your life with your siblings, both biological and spiritual, what are they telling? Now, I want to tell you something beautiful. Last week, as I was crossing, a lady was clearly injured. There were all these people helping. I get over there, there's 6 people helping. They didn't need more helpers. But I also want to say 4 of the helpers for this hurt lady on the sidewalk were origin folk. And I was like, oh, these are life-giving people. Eve's name means life-giving. Eve gave birth. And I think she and Adam were they had learned in how to give life to their kids. They had taught them how to worship. But Cain could not, in the moment, in the crisis, even with the Spirit of God meeting him and inviting him to not let sin rule over him. He did. We have an older brother. We have an older brother in Jesus who knew we were going to mess up. And that is why this older brother came. He came for reconciliation, and he came to invite us into learning new ways of being family. Now, You've seen this picture from Craig. I hope if you haven't, you need to set up an appointment and do a walk through the gospel. You're like, I know the gospel. You still want to do this. But here's what I would say. Cain had to leave the presence of God, not God's care. Cain actually had a distorted vision of himself. That's why this all happened. Cain could not recognize the truth of that his anger, his experience of being privileged, his experience of being the oldest and the best. Have you ever not had your name put where it should have been on a journal article, an academic journal article? Have you ever maybe been overlooked? Maybe you won a race and it was like, down to the millisecond, and they credited the other person. Cain was sure he was being wronged, and his self-identity could not adjust to the reality of what both his brother and God shone a light on. And then his relationship as a farmer was changed, and with the earth. And his relationship with his community was changed. Now, if we kept reading, you would find he later established a city. He clearly liked being with people. But we also have Abel. Abel was murdered, which is horrible. But Abel knew who he was, knew how to relate to the Lord beautifully, was in right relationship. And so his life still speaks. As you think about yourself, I want us to come and see what John, Jesus' disciple, wrote in his letter. We're in 1 John chapter 3, starting in verse 11. For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates a brother or a sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command, to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. The one who keeps God's commands lives in him, and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. And we have a spirit that can receive correction, that is learning what to do with anger, what is learning what to do with others being preferenced or recognized, that learns what to do with being downcast. We are given a really painful story. It'd probably make a good movie. But on Mother's Day, it's a heartbreaking story. It's a weird story for Mother's Day. But I actually believe, or I wouldn't have preached this, and I prayed and wrestled. Eve was life-giving. But being a mother is not just biology. It is the relationships. And Abel learned how to be life-giving, and Cain did not. Cain's descendant, if you skip ahead to verse 24, Lamech had murdered somebody and called out revenge. But what I want you to see in verse 24, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then let Lamech 77, and you will hear the words of Jesus, who said to Peter when asked, how many times do I have to forgive? What did he say? 70 times 7. Here is this curse of revenge being flipped into a growth, into forgiveness. So if Mother's Day is complicated for you, or maybe it's not the mother part of Mother's Day, but if family is complicated, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? If you do what is right, will you not also be accepted?